Hey guys, Steven Smelanich here. In the spirit of Friedrich Nietzsche, I will once again be philosophizing with a hammer to expose the hollowness of a person's worldview. Today we will be talking about YouTube's favorite anti-Mormon, Alyssa Grenfell, and her video, The Biggest Evidence Against the Mormon Church, where she discusses every anti-Mormon's favorite punching bag, the Book of Abraham.
Shocking! Someone's attacking the Book of Abraham. Next thing you know, they'll expose that Mormons don't drink coffee.
In case you didn't know, the Book of Abraham has a long, drawn-out, controversial history within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Anti-Mormons like to claim that it single-handedly disproves Joseph Smith's prophetic authority. Alyssa Grenfell calls it the Achilles heel of the Church, the ultimate kryptonite from which every believing member's faith shall crumble. As the infamous Jeremy Reynolds, the author of the Anti-Mormon Holy Scripture, the CES letter, wrote, "It is the smoking gun that completely obliterated my testimony of Joseph Smith and his claims." Let's take a look at Alyssa's video. In doing so, I will expose the many smokescreens she employs to make her points, cherry-picking whatever might make the church seem ridiculous and perhaps even a little insidious, while completely omitting all of the beautiful positive aspects. So, what is she hiding from you?
Disclaimer. This is not an attack on her character. She might be a fantastic person in real life, but in her opinions, which are often hypocritical, some playful jabbing may occur. While I am a believing member, I will do my best to avoid picking sides, and will acknowledge both the problems and strengths of the Book of Abraham. Neither Alyssa nor I are Egyptologists or historians, so everything we tell you should be taken with a major grain of salt. Some bias may occur. I won't address every single detail in her videos, and she employs the classic anti-Mormon tactic of bombarding her audience with so much information that they feel too overwhelmed to form their own conclusions, or conduct their own research. Well, two can play at that game.
But first I want to briefly mention the Kirtland Egyptian Papers, in which Joseph Smith attempted to recreate the Egyptian alphabet either before or after translating the Book of Abraham, but failed pretty hard. I have no way to defend this, except I guess God wasn't with him.
If you've ever tried Duolingo for Egyptian, you'll understand. That, or even prophets, have hobbies that don't always work out. If only Twitter had been around to cancel him for bad handwriting.
But anyways, moving on. The Papyri. In 1835, a few years after the founding of the Restored Church of Jesus Christ by Joseph Smith Jr., a traveling exhibitor named Michael Chandler came to Kirtland, Ohio, with ancient Egyptian artifacts, 4 mummies, and a collection of scrolls. Good old Joe Smith bought the collection and claimed the scrolls contained the writings of Abraham and Joseph of Egypt, as well as a tale of Princess Khatumin. Joseph Smith only managed to publish a few chapters of the Book of Abraham before his untimely death in 1844. His widow Emma later sold the collection to museums and private collectors before the artifacts completely vanished. Then, in 1966, the papyri were rediscovered in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and the church was soon able to reacquire them. However, controversy occurred when the modern Egyptologists using the Rosetta Stone, which was deciphered around the time Joseph Smith acquired the scrolls, soon concluded that the papyri had nothing whatsoever to do with Abraham or Joseph, and instead they were identified as funerary documents known as the Book of the Dead and the Book of the Breathings.
No, that's not true. That's impossible!
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
No! No!
Oops, I guess Joseph Smith made the whole thing up and he was duping us this whole time. Well, hang on. While I did just give a briefer summary than Alyssa does in her video covering similar plot points, there are a few notable details she conveniently forgets to mention. She claims the missing scroll theory is bogus because we found it, and the church apparently admitted it. However, I will dispute this claim. Most notably, she neglects to mention early eyewitnesses describing long, beautiful scrolls, yet only 11 small fragments remain today. The church never said they found the exact scroll for Abraham, aside from the facsimiles, only that they found fragments from his collection. This means that we have no way of knowing the exact number of scrolls or what was written on them, though some estimates suggest that there were 5 scrolls. But ultimately, we know there are, in fact, missing scrolls. Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph's mother, described the collection as including 2 or 3 other small pieces of papyrus with astronomical calculations, epitaphs, and etc., besides a long scroll of manuscript being the writings of Abraham and Joseph, as written by their own hand. She also mentioned 6 plates of brass, but nobody knows what she was referring to, as no other eyewitnesses mentions them. However, the descriptions of long scrolls are corroborated by the other eyewitness accounts. Mormon scholar Hugh Nibley, supported by Rough Stone ruling author Richard Bushman, suggested that the longest scroll could have enrolled across 2 mansion rooms. And if you don't trust Mormon descriptions, here's a quote from non-Mormon Egyptologist Edward Henry Ashmont. There is no doubt, at the time of their acquisition, the collection included at least 2 or more scrolls, likely much longer than the fragments we have today. So how did these long, beautiful scrolls end up as 11 measly fragments? The most common speculation is that the scrolls were destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. However, since the surviving fragments show no fire damage, another theory is that they naturally degraded over time due to exposure to moisture, sunlight, and air. Some pieces may have been intentionally cut out and glued onto newer paper for preservation, as there is actually evidence of that. Additionally, some fragments may still be in the collection of private owners who have no idea what they have. Alyssa and other anti-Mormons present this issue as if everything is 100% concrete, because they despise ambiguity. Why? Because ambiguity means they might be wrong, even if it is a super small chance. However, with only 11 fragments left, things continue to get even more ambiguous, especially since some of those fragments themselves remain unidentified. Fragments 4, 6, 7, and 8 have not been definitively identified as a part of the Book of the Dead or Book of the Breathings, indicating that additional scrolls once existed. As Egyptologist Edward Ashmont noted, Fragment 6 contains too little material to assign it definitively to any known papyrus. Ultimately, the fragmented state of the papyri leaves room for both faith-based and critical interpretations.
So The Smoking Gun is a book that wasn't even fully translated from a scroll we only have fragments of? Sure, that totally sounds like a case closed moment.
The Book of Abraham does mention the facsimiles as if they were a part of the same document, but in ancient Egyptian writings this wasn't always the case. As the Church's essay states, some have assumed that the hieroglyphs adjacent to and surrounding facsimile 1 must be a source for the text of the Book of Abraham. But this claim rests on the assumption that a vignette and its adjacent text must be associated in meaning. In fact, it was not uncommon for ancient Egyptian vignettes to be placed some distance from their associated commentary. This was especially common in Egyptian funerary texts, e.g. the Book of the Dead, where vignettes are sometimes positioned far from their corresponding text due to space constraints or artistic choices. However, some Egyptologists disagree that this rule applies here. The facsimiles definitely belong with the Book of the Breathings and the Book of the Dead. But maybe Abraham used the images to illustrate his story because he thought they were fitting representations. Maybe not, but it's fun to speculate. His direct mention of them does suggest that they were already present when he wrote his account. But what about those facsimiles, which Egyptologists claim clearly do not align with Joseph Smith's interpretations? Good question. Alyssa claims that Joseph Smith got absolutely nothing right, so let's fact-check that assertion. While it does seem that our self-professed prophet got a great many things wrong, he also got a few things right. Let's briefly go over those facsimiles. In Facsimile 1, Smith identifies this as Abraham being sacrificed, while Egyptologists say that it depicts a person being prepared for burial based on similar imagery. However, there's something odd about the comparison. In most embalming scenes, the dead person is shown in a King Tut-style coffin, whereas in the Joseph Smith papyri, the figure isn't in a coffin at all. Instead, he has one leg up and his arms raised, almost as if he is struggling against being sacrificed? Maybe. In general, what dead person has his arms and legs raised? He's supposed to be dead. I don't think there's any Egyptian books of the dead that describe how the person being embalmed must have his legs and arms raised. It doesn't make any sense. But I digress. Another theory is that this is not Abraham being sacrificed, but Osiris being sacrificed. Now that would make a lot more sense. What Smith did correctly identify was the bird as a spiritual figure, whether this be an angel or the deceased soul. Everything else, not really. He didn't really get much else right. In Facsimile 2, Smith correctly identified a divine authority figure, divinity associated with celestial bodies, the sun's connection to divine power, and the cosmos being divided into 4 quarters, also sacred writings. In Facsimile 3, however, it looks like he didn't get any right. Sorry, Joe, better luck next time.
Even Babe Ruth didn't hit every home run, but sure, let's throw out everything because of one big miss.
While Alyssa is wrong in her claim that Joseph got everything wrong, his facsimile interpretations still don't make him look great. So how do apologists defend this? Mormon scholars John Gee and Hugh Nibley have toyed with the idea that the facsimiles hold dual meanings. Maybe these images originated with Egyptian mythology, but were later picked up by Israelites who reinterpreted them as being associated with Abraham and their God. Or perhaps the images date even further back, finding their way into both Egyptian and Israelite traditions, with each group assigning their own meanings, completely unaware of the original intent. It would be fascinating if Old Testament scholars such as John Day from Oxford offered their own interpretations of the images. There is precedent for believing in dual meanings. Think of the Egyptian Ankh, originally symbolizing the uterus, rebirth, and immortality, but later adopted by Coptic Christians to represent the cross of Jesus Christ. Or consider how the swastika, once a Buddhist symbol of well-being and good fortune, was twisted by the Nazis into an emblem of racial supremacy. Though not all Egyptologists agree. Like non-Mormon scholar Robert K. Rittner noted, the images in the Book of Abraham facsimiles are entirely consistent with Egyptian funerary traditions, and there is no evidence whatsoever that they had anything to do with Abraham. The assertion of a dual meaning is purely modern speculation. Of course, this doesn't account for the possibility of religious syncretism over time.
Oh no, religious syncretism. It's almost like different civilizations influence each other.
Now let's talk about the anachronisms. Alyssa mentions this, and this is the easiest argument to dispute. She argues that because the Book of Abraham opens by saying it was written by his own hand upon papyrus, we are meant to take this painfully literally. The problem? The fragments we have date to around 150 BC, about 1,500 years after Abraham lived, so how could he have written it by his own hand? Right? I'm sorry, I just can't take this argument seriously. It's just so stupid. Consider this phrase, written by his own hand. It only appears in the modern introduction, and not in the actual text. These anti-Mormons have clearly never heard of copies. I own a copy of the Odyssey, but that doesn't mean that it was as old as Homer himself.
Someone get this woman a library card. Breaking news, all modern Bibles are fake because Moses didn't personally print them on an HP DeskJet.
Other anachronisms she mentions include terms that supposedly appeared long after Abraham's time, Chaldeans, Egyptus, and Pharaoh. But these could simply indicate that the Book of Abraham was indeed a copy of a copy of a copy times 1,000, passed down through the generations. Later scribes may have updated certain terms to make them more comprehensible to modern readers. For example, John Gee notes, the term pharaoh in the Book of Abraham could simply be a modern way of referring to an ancient Egyptian ruler. That said, there is one anachronism that's harder to defend. The revolutions of Kolob and Cocoa Beam and all those other crazy words don't appear to have any ancient correspondence.
Dang, I was hoping there'd be an ancient hieroglyph that just said Kolob with a little alien next to it.
Truths anti-Mormons don't want you to know about. With all of the messiness surrounding the Book of Abraham, we see one defining truth, a truth that anti-Mormons like Alyssa Grenfell hope you and her brainwashed army of cult followers never discover. As Tim Hickson from Hello Future Me so aptly put it,
how many times do I need to say this? History is complicated!
history is a science, constantly evolving through interpretation, reinterpretation, and the degradation of old texts. Things are lost, rediscovered, shuffled around. The further back you go, the more mythical and strange history becomes. It wasn't long ago that only the elite could read and write, and if you weren't painstakingly etching words into stone or metal or clay, you'd write it on paper, which decays easily. And in order to preserve your writings, you'd have to seal them up in airtight jars, hiding them in caves, and praying that invading armies didn't find them and burn them. You had to hope that an earthquake didn't bury the cave. So should we really be surprised that the Book of Abraham is as messy as it is?
I know, it's truly shocking that a 4,000-year-old document doesn't come with a nice, laminated bibliography.
But let's flip the script and talk about things that actually make the Book of Abraham look pretty good. More truths that anti-Mormons like Alyssa Grenfell don't want you to know about. Alyssa briefly mentions the Gospel Topics essays, but conveniently ignores the strongest evidence for the book's authenticity, points that even non-Mormon Egyptologists have yet to dispute, including Robert Rittner. Let's go through those. The book speaks of the plain of Elisham, a name not mentioned in the Bible. An ancient inscription not discovered and translated until the 20th century mentions a town called Elisham, located in northwestern Syria. Further, Abraham 3:22-23 is written in a poetic structure more characteristic of Near Eastern languages than early American writing style. Facsimile 1 in Abraham 1:17 mention the idolatrous god Elkanah. This deity is not mentioned in the Bible, yet modern scholars have identified it as being the gods worshipped by ancient Mesopotamians. In the Book of Abraham, God teaches Abraham about the sun, the moon, and the stars. I show these things unto thee before ye go into Egypt. The Lord says, that ye may declare all these words. Ancient texts repeatedly refer to Abraham instructing the Egyptians in knowledge of the heavens. For example, Ptolemy, who lived under Egyptian rule in the 2nd century BC, wrote that Abraham taught astronomy and other sciences to the Egyptian priests. A later Egyptian text, discovered in the 20th century, tells how the pharaoh tried to sacrifice Abraham, only to be foiled when Abraham was discovered by an angel. Later, according to this text, Abraham taught members of Pharaoh's court through astronomy. All these details are found in the Book of Abraham. Other details in the Book of Abraham are found in ancient traditions located across the Near East. These include Terah, Abraham's father, being an idolater, a famine striking Abraham's homeland, Abraham's familiarity with Egyptian idols, Abraham's being younger than 75 years old when he left Haran, as the Bible account states. Some of these extra biblical elements were available in apocryphal books or biblical documents in Joseph Smith's lifetime, but others were confined to non-biblical traditions, inaccessible or unknown to 19th century Americans. Now here is a grand total of, a crap ton of texts that Joseph Smith didn't have access to, which clearly match up with the Book of Abraham. Joe Smith, you luckiest guesser in the world. You might say that all this came from lucky guessing, based on Smith's reading of the Bible and the Book of Jashers, which, by the way, we have no way of knowing he had the Book of Jashers. And maybe you'd be right, but that's not the point. The fact is that however he did it, Joseph Smith got these points correct, and there's no disputing that. Wow, it's still going. And it's still going. Wow, that is a lot of stuff. Wow. It makes you wonder if the Book of Abraham is authentic, don't it? And it's still going. And it's still going. Wow. Okay. Ooh, this will take a second, won't it? Is it still going? It's still going.
Joseph Smith strikes again with his magical time-traveling library card. Yeah, I know. More lucky guesses. At what point does lucky guessing become statistically impossible, though?
Oh, sorry I had to make you sit through all that. Now, where were we? Oh yes, the Book of Abraham. Now we get to my favorite part of this megaton video essay, the part I will defend to my dying breath. Ever the negative anti-Mormon, Alyssa refuses to acknowledge any redeeming qualities of the church. She somehow found things to complain about when it comes to Mormon funerals. What the heck? I've been to Mormon funerals. They seem totally normal to me. No idea what she's talking about. Anyway, that'll be a thing for another time. But in general, it seems that she is so determined to prove the church fraudulent that she is willing to ignore the most revolutionary doctrines Joseph Smith introduced. The one in particular from the Book of Abraham, the premortal existence. This doctrine isn't just unique to Mormonism, it represents a radical shift in religious thought. Many Christian traditions believe that God creates the soul at the moment of birth, ex nihilo, out of nothing, and so are eternally bound to their God. The Book of Abraham teaches, however, that our intelligence is eternal, predating our physical bodies. Instead of these glorious implications, Alyssa focuses instead on the racial controversies surrounding the book, claiming that Joseph Smith himself promoted the belief that black people were less valiant in the premortal life, and were therefore banned from holding the priesthood.
Joseph Smith even went a step further with the Pearl of Great Price to say there is scriptural proof, which was then used by later prophets, scriptural proof to legitimize our belief as to why black people can't have the priesthood.
This claim is demonstrably false. Please show me, Alyssa, where did you find this claim? If this doctrine originated with Joseph Smith, why did he personally ordain 2 black men, Elijah Abel and Q. Walker Lewis, to the Melchizedek priesthood? Because the idea of racial inferiority didn't come from him. It came from Brigham Young years after, decades after.
Darn it, Brigham. We were doing so well.
The Book of Mormon itself makes it clear, the Lord denieth none that come unto him, black and white, bond and free, male and female, all are alike unto God. But what about the infamous skin of blackness? That God supposedly cursed the Lamanites with, and was supposedly the same thing he cursed Cain with, and his descendants. Well, this verse has been misunderstood and manipulated for years. It may not even refer to literal skin color, but instead symbolic spiritual death, which manifests as a person looking like Black Death, which sounds a lot like how Job laments, "My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat." Alyssa mentions at the same time David O. McKay, the 9th president of the church, supposedly using the Book of Abraham to excuse the priesthood ban. As he once admitted, "I know of no scriptural basis for denying the priesthood to Negroes other than the one verse in the Book of Abraham." Pardon my language, those were his words, not mine. Yet he also stated there is not now, nor has there ever been, a doctrine in this church that taught that the Negroes, again, pardon my language, are under a divine curse. So was McKay contradicting himself? Not necessarily. He later admitted that he personally wanted to lift the priesthood ban, but felt he needed a revelation to do so. A revelation that ultimately came to Spencer W. Kimball in 1978.
Imagine waiting literal decades for God to send an email.
The Book of Abraham never states that anyone was less valiant in the premortal life. It just says that the pharaoh was barred from the priesthood because of his lineage. Had nothing to do with the premortal life. With these misinterpretations out of the way, let's talk about the glorious potential that comes from the doctrine of premortal existence. This one teaching transforms the entire human experience. It tells us that you are as eternal as God himself. You existed before you were born and will exist forever after. You are responsible for what you become, not your parents, not even your bishop, not even God himself.
So much for the whole Mormons are brainwashed narrative. This is about as empowering as it gets.
This aligns perfectly with Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialist declaration that existence precedes essence. If you apply Sartre's philosophy to the Book of Abraham, you realize something profound. We are condemned to be free even before birth. Every choice we make matters. Our eternal nature means we are co-creators of our own destiny. But this radical freedom also comes with radical responsibility.
With great power comes great responsibility.
The Book of Abraham teaches that humanity was a council of gods which created the world, and so we are the ones responsible for the problem of evil. If you're looking for secular evidence of the premortal existence, consider Einstein's law of conservation of energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The energy that makes you who you are has existed for all eternity, and given the infinite expanse of time, it will exist in the exact same form again that you are right now.
Take that, atheists.
Conclusion. I have presented both the strengths and weaknesses of the Book of Abraham. Alyssa Grenfell, she has presented only the weaknesses, deliberately hiding anything that challenges her narrative. The truth is that the original scrolls are largely missing. We only have 11 small fragments to examine. Joseph Smith mostly failed at interpreting the Facsimiles, yet somehow got several things right in the text itself based on ancient texts that he didn't have any access to. The book contains groundbreaking doctrine, including the premortal existence and Abrahamic astronomy, both of which align with ancient records unknown to 19th century America. And now my call to action for Alyssa Grenfell herself. If by some 1 in 5 billion chance that she is watching this video, here is my challenge to you. Stop being a hypocrite! Which is worse, the church hiding uncomfortable facts to preserve its image, or you hiding positive truths because you want to paint the church as ridiculous and maybe even a little bit sinister as much as possible? If you don't want your followers to be a brainwashed cult, then stop allowing blind obedience to your interpretations. I urge you to follow the example of Nietzsche's Zarathustra. Now I go alone, my disciples. You too now go away and be alone. Thus I will it. Truly I advise you, depart from me, and guard yourselves against Zarathustra. And better still, be ashamed of him. Perhaps he has deceived you. The man of knowledge must not only love his enemies, but must be able to hate his friends. The truth is never simple. And the Book of Abraham, like all of history, is a lot more complicated than either side wants to admit.
Oh, hello there, Stevo's viewers. It's me, Susan, and I'm here to give you the ultimate anti-advice. Whatever you do, definitely don't subscribe to his channel. It's not like there's any interesting content or anything. And that bell icon? Pfft, ignore it. No need to be notified about new videos. Feel free to click that dislike button. Feedback is so overrated. And definitely don't share this with anyone, especially not your friends. And as for his book, Latter-day Saints are Existentialists, don't bother. Who needs insightful content? And definitely don't check out those videos about the most terrifying Mormon doctrine or the shocking confessions of a video game character who is Mormon. Keep it righteous, everyone!